Hey there! Today we are talking about proteins. This is our final molecule or macromolecule of life that we'll be talking about. And so let us begin. So proteins are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, just like the other molecules, but they also contain nitrogen and phosphorus. So here's nitrogen and here's phosphorus. And so it's very important that we eat protein because, as you know from before, from learning about carbohydrates and lipids, they have only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in them. So if we don't eat proteins, then we don't have enough nitrogen and phosphorus going into our bodies to do the jobs that it needs to do. So it's very important that we eat lots of protein. And so what are the function of proteins in our body, or in our cells? And so the function of proteins, one, is that they provide structure for our body. So here, if we're looking at meat here, this right here is just a lot of protein. It's the structure. It's what our bodies are made of. And so that's very important. And it's a very high, we have a very high amount of protein in our body. And so they also do many jobs in our bodies, like little robots. So here, this would be a protein that acts as like a robot in our body. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And finally, they also act like channels. They let molecules into and out of our cells. So first, let's talk about structural proteins. A structural protein, an example of one is called collagen. So if you see the little stringy stuff under here, this is the protein that we find underneath our skin. And it actually is what keeps us from being very, very wrinkly. And so as we get older and we stop producing as much collagen and our collagen breaks down, that's when we get wrinkles showing up on our skin. And so that's why some people get collagen treatments, and it helps to reduce the amount of wrinkles that they have. And so this protein, this is the actual structure, is a long, stringy fibril that exists right underneath our skin. So that's one type of structural protein that we have. But we have many different types of structural proteins. But here, let's go on to our next function. Remember that proteins do jobs in our bodies, just like little robots. And one of the little robots in our bodies we call our enzymes. Enzymes are proteins that do all sorts of jobs. And one example of things that enzymes do is they break down our food. An example of an enzyme is lactase. So this pink part of this picture is the enzyme or the protein. So the enzyme or the protein called lactase is going to break down a sugar called lactose. Lactose is the type of sugar that we get in milk. And so milk, or milk sugar, is made of 2 glucose molecules. And so what this enzyme does is, you can see the lactose, the 2 glucose molecules, fit into the enzyme. There's a very specific spot where that fits. And then it breaks those 2 glucose molecules down, and so that we can digest it, and so that those glucose molecules can travel down into your small intestines and absorb through the lining of your small intestines and then go into your bloodstream. And so here, this enzyme right here can build some molecules up. So some enzymes break molecules down, and some enzymes will build molecules up. And so those are the proteins that act like little robots in our body. They're enzymes. And an example of an enzyme is lactase, which breaks down the sugar lactose. And we know that a sugar is a carbohydrate. And here's our final function of proteins. Some proteins act like channels for molecules to move into and out of our cells. So they block some molecules out and they let some molecules in. And so this blue thing here, this would be what the protein looks like. And so it's very important the way that it's made, that its structure has a very specific shape to allow very specific types of molecules in. So if we have sugar, glucose in our blood, then some cells are going to need to allow that sugar to go from the blood and into the cell. And so it's going to travel through a protein or a protein channel. And so let's think that these little green things is the sugar that we broke down into glucose, and then it's going to travel through the protein channel into the intracellular or the inside of the cell. And so that is one job of a protein. And so the monomer of a protein is an amino acid. So each of these little circles is an amino acid. And so the polymer of a protein is a protein. And so you can see that this protein is just a string of amino acids. But a very important thing happens to this string of amino acids before we actually call it a protein, is that this string of amino acids gets folded into a very specific shape so that it can do a very specific job. So here we looked at 3 different types of proteins. We looked at a structural protein called collagen, which is very long and thin. And because it's very long and thin, it can do its job to provide structure underneath our skin. The protein channel has to be shaped like a channel or like a cylinder with a hole in it so that molecules can pass through. So it's very important that the string of amino acids are put into a shape that molecules can pass through. And finally, our other protein that we talked about was the enzyme, or the little robots. And it's very important that they have a very specific shape, because the lactose has to be able to fit into this enzyme, and in order to break the bond and to break down the glucose. And so if it is folded into the wrong shape, it's not going to be able to do the job that it needs to do. And so the shape of a protein is very important. And the way that a protein gets its shape is by the way that it's folded. And that's it for notes. Okay, have a great day.